It was just another rainy morning in Seattle when Andy walked into the Sunrise coffee shop, shaking water droplets from his jacket. The smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries filled the air as he joined the line, his mind focused on the big presentation he had later that day. He didn't know it yet, but this ordinary morning would change his life forever. The coffee shop was busier than usual because of the rain. People were huddled inside, creating a cozy atmosphere with their quiet chatter and the soft jazz playing in the background. While waiting in line, Andy noticed a young woman helping an elderly gentleman who had dropped his walking stick. There was something special about her smile. It was genuine and warm, reaching all the way to her eyes. Her name was Jenny, as Andy would later learn. She wore a simple blue sweater and jeans, her dark hair tied back in a casual ponytail. Nothing flashy, just natural beauty and a kind heart. After helping the elderly man to his seat, she turned around and accidentally bumped into Andy. "Oh no, I'm so sorry," she said, looking embarrassed. Andy couldn't help but smile. "No worries at all." "That was really nice of you to help him," he replied, gesturing toward the elderly gentleman. They ended up ordering the same drink, a caramel latte with an extra shot of espresso. "Great minds think alike," Jenny joked, and somehow they found themselves sharing a small table by the window, watching the rain fall outside. The conversation flowed naturally. Andy learned that Jenny was a pediatrician at the local children's hospital, while he told her about his work as an architectural engineer. But what really connected them was their shared experience of growing up in foster homes. "You were in the system too?" Jenny asked, her eyes widening with surprise. Andy nodded, stirring his coffee. "Yeah, from age 3. Bounced around a bit before landing with a good family in Portland." "That's crazy," Jenny said softly. "I was in foster care in San Francisco. It's not something you meet many people who understand." As they talked, they discovered more similarities. Both had very few memories of their birth parents, both had changed homes several times before finding stable placements, and both had worked incredibly hard to build successful careers despite their challenging starts in life. The morning flew by, and Andy almost forgot about his presentation until his phone buzzed with a reminder. They exchanged numbers, both feeling that special spark of connection that rarely comes along in life. Before leaving, they'd both reached for the last copy of The Great Gatsby on the coffee shop's small bookshelf. "You like classic literature?" Jenny asked, pleasantly surprised. "I try to read one classic every month," Andy admitted. "Helps me unwind from all the technical stuff at work." They decided to share the book. Jenny would read it first and then pass it to Andy, giving them a perfect excuse to meet again. As they said goodbye, neither could stop smiling, both feeling like they'd just stumbled upon something rare and precious. That evening, Andy sat in his apartment, unable to focus on his work. He kept thinking about Jenny's laugh, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, and how comfortable it felt talking to her. For the first time in years, he felt truly understood by someone. Little did they know that this chance meeting, which seemed like the beginning of a beautiful love story, would lead them down a path they never could have imagined. Sometimes life's greatest surprises come wrapped in the most ordinary moments, like a rainy morning in a coffee shop, where two people who were meant to find each other finally did, though not in the way anyone would have expected. The coffee shop would become their special place, where they'd return again and again, building memories and sharing stories. Each visit deepened their connection as they discovered more things they had in common: their love for old movies, their habit of reading books from back to front first, and their shared dream of traveling to Japan someday. What seemed like a perfect beginning was actually setting the stage for an incredible revelation that would test their understanding of love, family, and destiny in ways they could never have prepared for. But for now, in that cozy coffee shop on a rainy Seattle morning, everything was perfect, full of promise and possibility. After their first meeting at Sunrise Coffee Shop, Andy and Jenny's relationship blossomed like a flower in spring. They started with simple text messages, sharing funny moments from their days. Jenny would send pictures of the cute drawings her young patients made for her, while Andy shared sketches of buildings he was designing. Their first official date was supposed to be dinner at a fancy restaurant, but Seattle's unpredictable weather had other plans. A power outage hit the whole block just as they arrived. Instead of letting it ruin their evening, they ended up buying sandwiches from a food truck and sitting in Andy's car, sharing stories and laughing as rain drummed on the roof. "This is actually better than any fancy dinner," Jenny said, wiping mustard from her chin. Andy couldn't agree more. There was something magical about how comfortable they felt together, like old friends who had just found each other again. As weeks turned into months, they discovered more about each other's lives. Jenny loved working with children, but admitted that sometimes it broke her heart to see them sick. "That's why I became a doctor," she explained one evening as they walked through the park. "I remember being sick in foster care once, and this amazing doctor made me feel less scared. I wanted to do that for other kids." Andy understood that drive to make a difference. He shared how his foster experience influenced his own career choice. "Every time we moved homes, I noticed how different spaces made me feel. Some houses felt cold and unwelcoming, others felt like real homes. That's why I love designing buildings now. I want to create spaces that make people feel safe and happy." Their shared background in foster care created a deep bond between them. Both understood the complexity of growing up without biological parents, the mix of gratitude for their foster families and lingering questions about their origins. They could talk about these feelings without judgment or explanation needed. One rainy Sunday afternoon, while they were cooking together in Andy's kitchen, or rather, Andy was cooking while Jenny admirably burned toast, she opened up about her earliest memories. "I remember someone singing to me in Chinese," she said, stirring the soup, "just fragments really. Sometimes I wonder if it was my birth mother." Andy nearly dropped his spoon. "That's incredible. I have a similar memory. A woman's voice singing a lullaby in Chinese." They looked at each other, amazed at yet another coincidence. "Must be why we both love karaoke so much," Jenny joked, trying to lighten the moment. Their relationship deepened naturally. They met each other's friends, who all agreed they were perfect together. Andy's best friend Mike said he'd never seen him so happy, while Jenny's colleague Rita claimed they were literally made for each other, words that would later take on an entirely different meaning. 6 months into dating, they took a weekend trip to a small coastal town. Walking along the beach at sunset, Andy realized he couldn't imagine his life without Jenny. She understood him in a way no one else ever had. When she got excited about something, her whole face lit up. When she was tired after a long shift at the hospital, she still made time to check if he'd eaten dinner. The proposal wasn't planned. They were sitting on a piece of driftwood, watching the waves crash against the shore, when Andy turned to her and said, "I think you're my soulmate." Jenny squeezed his hand and replied, "I think so too." "Should we make it official then?" he asked, heart pounding. Jenny's eyes widened as she realized what he was asking. "Are you proposing to me on a random piece of driftwood?" She laughed, tears forming in her eyes. "I am," Andy said, suddenly nervous. "Is that okay?" Jenny threw her arms around him. "It's perfect," she whispered. "It's so us." They celebrated with hot chocolate from a beachside cafe, both unable to stop smiling. That evening, they called their close friends and foster families to share the news. Everyone was overjoyed, especially since many had predicted this outcome from the moment they met. Looking back, everything about their courtship seemed perfectly natural, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. Their similar backgrounds, shared experiences, even their matching dimples when they smiled, it all felt like proof that they were meant to be together. Neither could have imagined that all these similarities, which seemed like cosmic signs of their compatibility, were actually clues to a truth that would turn their world upside down. But for now, they were just two people deeply in love, planning their future together, blissfully unaware of the shocking revelation that awaited them. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, a perfect spring morning in Seattle. Andy stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his bow tie for the 100th time, while his best friend Mike tried to calm his nerves. "She's the one, buddy," Mike said, patting his shoulder. "You've never been more sure of anything in your life." The small garden venue looked like something out of a fairy tale. White chairs lined the grass, with wildflowers scattered along the aisle. They had chosen this place because it reminded Jenny of the park where Andy had first told her he loved her. Simple, natural, and full of life, just like their relationship. In the bridal suite, Jenny was getting ready with her close friend Rita, who had been by her side since their first year working together at the children's hospital. "You look absolutely beautiful," Rita said, helping her with the veil. Jenny's dress was elegant but understated, perfectly matching her personality. Mrs. Wilson, an elderly social worker who had known Jenny during her teenage years in foster care, knocked on the door. "May I come in?" she asked softly. When she saw Jenny in her wedding dress, tears filled her eyes. Something about the bride's features stirred a distant memory, but she couldn't quite place it. "You've come so far," Mrs. Wilson said, holding Jenny's hands. "I remember that determined little girl who said she'd become a doctor someday. And look at you now, not just a wonderful doctor, but about to marry someone who understands you completely." The ceremony was intimate, with only 60 guests, mostly friends they'd made in their adult lives, and a few special people from their foster care days. Neither had any biological family to invite, but the room was filled with so much love it hardly mattered. As Jenny walked down the aisle, Andy felt his heart skip a beat. The sun caught her dark hair just right, making her look like she was glowing. Their eyes met, and both broke into those matching dimpled smiles that their friends always teased them about. The officiant spoke about how love finds us in unexpected ways, about how some people are just meant to find each other. Andy and Jenny had written their own vows, simple and heartfelt words that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "I never believed in fate," Andy said, his voice shaking slightly, "until I met you. Everything that seemed hard in my life, growing up without parents, moving between homes, it all led me to that coffee shop, to that moment, to you." Jenny's vows made everyone laugh and cry at the same time. "You're the first person who ever understood why I read books from back to front sometimes," she said. "The first person who didn't think it was weird that I need to organize my closet by color. You make me feel like I belong somewhere finally." During the ring exchange, Lucky, their golden retriever and ring bearer, decided to sit right between them, making everyone laugh. It was these little unplanned moments that made the day feel real and perfect in its own way. At the reception, Mike gave a touching best man speech. "I've known Andy for 10 years, he said, raising his glass. "And I've never seen him as happy as he is with Jenny. It's like they've known each other their whole lives." The dance floor was full all evening, but the highlight was Andy and Jenny's first dance. They had chosen an old Chinese love song, a note to their shared heritage. As they swayed to the music, guests commented on how in sync they were, how they moved like they could read each other's minds. Mrs. Wilson watched them dance, that nagging feeling returning. Something about the way they both tilted their heads when they laughed, the similar curve of their smiles. But weddings often made people see connections that weren't there, she thought, dismissing her concerns. Later in the evening, Jenny's colleague Dr. Roberts commented on how they could pass for siblings with their similar features. "That's what happens when you're meant for each other," someone joked. "You start looking alike." Everyone laughed, not knowing the weight those words would carry in the future. As the night drew to a close, Andy and Jenny snuck away from the party to share a quiet moment in the garden. The fairy lights twinkled above them like stars, and the spring air was sweet with the scent of flowers. "I feel like I've been waiting for you my whole life," Jenny whispered, leaning her head on Andy's shoulder. "Like every hard thing that happened was just leading me to you." Andy held her close, feeling like his heart might burst with happiness. They didn't know it then, but those words held more truth than either could have imagined. Their paths had indeed been leading them to each other, just not in the way they thought. The universe had brought them together, but its plan was far more complicated than anyone could have guessed. As they drove away that night, tin cans rattling behind their car and "Just Married" written on the back window, they felt like their story was just beginning. In a way it was, but not the story they thought they were going to tell. The wrestling dreams started on a rainy Friday evening in Boston. 10-year-old Tommy Martinez sat cross-legged on his worn-out blue carpet, eyes glued to their small TV screen. His mom had just finished her double shift at the local diner and was making dinner in their tiny kitchen, the smell of grilled cheese filling their 2-bedroom apartment. That's when it happened, the moment that would change Tommy's life forever. The familiar trumpet intro of John Cena's theme song blasted through the TV speakers, and Tommy jumped to his feet, nearly knocking over his glass of orange juice. His mom couldn't help but smile from the kitchen, watching her son's face light up like a Christmas tree. Mom, come quick, it's John Cena," Tommy shouted, bouncing on his toes with excitement. She wiped her hands on her apron and joined him, knowing exactly what this meant to her boy. On screen, John Cena stood tall in his never-give-up shirt, his presence filling their small living room with energy. Tommy mimicked every move, every gesture. When Cena threw up his hand for the "you can't see me" taunt, Tommy did the same, his small hand waving in perfect sync. "One day, I'm gonna meet him, Mom," Tommy declared, his voice full of pure conviction. His mom ruffled his hair, saying maybe someday Mio. She didn't have the heart to tell him how impossible that seemed. They could barely afford cable TV, let alone WWE tickets. But Tommy's passion only grew stronger. He started saving every penny from his allowance in a plastic jar labeled WWE Fund with wobbly letters. He'd help Mrs. Rodriguez from next door with her groceries, earning $1 here and there. The jar didn't fill up very fast, but Tommy never lost hope. His bedroom walls slowly transformed into a John Cena shrine. Posters from wrestling magazines covered every inch of space, some slightly wrinkled because Tommy had carefully smoothed out the creases from the discounted damaged copies he could afford. His favorite was the one where Cena held up the championship belt. Tommy would practice that pose in front of his mirror every morning before school. At school, Tommy's enthusiasm was contagious. During lunch breaks, he'd gather his friends in the playground and teach them Cena's famous catchphrases. Soon they had their own little wrestling club, using chalk to draw a ring on the concrete. Tommy was always John Cena, of course. The teachers couldn't help but smile when they heard young voices shouting "You can't see me" during recess. Tommy's mom worked extra shifts that winter, secretly setting aside a little money each week. On Christmas morning, Tommy's eyes welled up with tears when he unwrapped a genuine John Cena championship belt replica. It wasn't the newest model, and she found it on sale, but to Tommy, it was better than any other gift in the world. "This is just like his," Tommy exclaimed, holding the belt up high just like his hero. His mom captured the moment on her old phone, her own eyes misty as she watched her son parade around their small living room, the belt almost too big for his small frame. Every Thursday night became sacred in the household. Tommy would rush through his homework, help with chores, and even eat all his vegetables, anything to ensure he wouldn't miss SmackDown. He'd sit there in his Cena shirt, a birthday gift from his aunt, clutching his championship belt, completely lost in the world of WWE. The neighbors got used to hearing "The time is up, my time is now" through the thin apartment walls on wrestling nights. Instead of complaining, they'd often ask Tommy for updates on the latest matches. Even grumpy old Mr. Wilson from apartment 3B would stop to hear Tommy's excited match recaps. Tommy started keeping a notebook where he wrote down all of Cena's quotes about never giving up and staying strong. When things got tough at school or when his mom looked tired from working so hard, he'd remember these words. They weren't just wrestling catchphrases to him. They were life lessons from the person he looked up to most, after his mom. Late at night, when Tommy thought his mom wasn't listening, she'd hear him practicing Cena's speeches in front of his mirror. "Never give up, never surrender," he'd say, adjusting his imaginary wristbands. Those moments made all her extra shifts worth it, seeing her son find such joy and inspiration in his hero. What Tommy didn't know was that his own determination and positive attitude had started inspiring others. His teachers noticed how he used Cena's hustle, loyalty, respect motto in real life, helping younger kids with their schoolwork, standing up to bullies with words, not wrestling moves, and never missing a chance to encourage his classmates. It started with what everyone thought was just a bad cold. Tommy had been feeling tired after school, which wasn't like him at all. Usually, he'd bounce through the door, ready to demonstrate his latest wrestling moves to his mom. But lately, he'd been heading straight to the couch, his championship belt dragging behind him. His mom noticed the bruises first. They appeared on his knees and elbows, which wouldn't have been strange for an active kid like Tommy, except that he showed up even when he hadn't been playing rough. At first, she thought it was from his playground wrestling club, but something in her gut told her this was different. The day they went to the doctor's office, Tommy wore his favorite John Cena shirt. It was a little faded from so many washes, but he said it gave him extra strength. While they sat in the waiting room, he kept himself busy by drawing pictures of wrestling rings and writing down ideas for his own finishing moves. The doctor's words hit them like a thunderbolt on that sunny Tuesday morning. Leukemia. Tommy didn't fully understand what it meant at first, but he knew it was serious from the way his mom's hand trembled as she held his. The doctor kept talking about treatments and schedules, but Tommy was focused on one thing. He'd have to miss WWE SmackDown tomorrow night. "But Mom," he whispered, tugging at her sleeve, "how will I know if Cena wins his match?" His mom pulled him close, tears in her eyes, and promised they'd find a way to watch it together, no matter what. That's when Tommy remembered something John Cena always said: rise above hate. Maybe this was just another opponent to rise above. The hospital became their second home. Tommy's room on the pediatric floor slowly transformed into a mini WWE arena. The nurses helped him tape his posters on the walls, careful to use special removable tape that wouldn't damage the paint. His championship belt hung proudly at the foot of his bed, catching the sunlight that streamed through the window. Tommy turned every treatment session into a wrestling match. The nurses played along, announcing his entrance as he walked into the treatment room, making his way to the chair, weighing in at 75 pounds, the unstoppable, unbeatable Tommy the Warrior Martinez. It became a tradition that made even the toughest days a little easier to handle. His John Cena wristband never left his arm. When the treatments made him feel sick or scared, he'd touch it like a talisman. "You can't see me," he'd declare to the cancer cells, his small voice fierce with determination. The medical staff were amazed by his spirit. He turned every blood test into a championship match, every scan into a title defense. Some days were harder than others. There were mornings when Tommy couldn't muster the energy for his usual Cena impressions. On those days, his mom would sit beside his bed and read him stories about legendary wrestling matches. She learned all the wrestlers' names and moves just so she could make the stories more exciting for him. The other kids on the floor started gravitating toward Tommy's room. It became known as the WWE headquarters of the pediatric wing. He'd share his wrestling magazines with them and teach them Cena's 5 moves of doom. The sound of children chanting "You can't see me" echoed through the hospital corridors, bringing smiles to tired parents' faces. Tommy kept a special notebook by his bed where he wrote letters to John Cena. He never sent them. They couldn't afford the fan club membership to get the mailing address, but writing them made him feel connected to his hero. "Dear John," he'd write, "today I had 3 shots and I didn't cry once. I used your never give up power." The doctors were impressed by Tommy's attitude. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it," they told his mom. "His positive attitude is helping the treatment work better." His mom would just smile, knowing it was the strength he borrowed from his wrestling hero that kept him going. During his monthly checkups, Tommy would wear a different John Cena shirt each time. He had quite a collection now, gifts from nurses, other patients' families, and even one from his school class who did a small fundraiser for him. Each shirt, he claimed, had its own special power for different types of hospital days. Even on the toughest days, when the medicine made him feel awful, Tommy never complained. Instead, he'd adjust his wristband and say one of Cena's catchphrases: hustle, loyalty, respect. The hustle was fighting the disease, the loyalty was to his mom and medical team, and the respect was for his own body's strength to heal. His mom started a small tradition of watching wrestling highlights with him after each treatment. She'd bring her old laptop to the hospital, and they'd huddle together on his bed, watching John Cena's greatest matches. Tommy would predict every move before it happened, providing his own commentary that often made the nurses stop and listen. Tommy's mom sat alone in their tiny kitchen late one night after Tommy had finally fallen asleep. The house felt extra quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you think too much. She stared at her laptop screen, reading about the Make-A-Wish Foundation for the 5th time that evening. Her coffee had gone cold, but she barely noticed. She could hear Tommy's gentle breathing from his room, mixed with the soft whir of the medical equipment they'd brought home from the hospital. His latest round of treatment had been particularly tough, yet he hadn't complained once. Instead, he'd spent the evening showing her his newest wrestling move drawings, explaining each one in detail despite being exhausted. The Make-A-Wish website seemed to glow in the dim kitchen light. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as doubt crept in. Was she getting his hopes up too high? What if it didn't work out? But then she remembered something Tommy always said when quoting his hero, "Never give up." Taking a deep breath, she started filling out the application. The next few weeks were a dance of secret phone calls and hushed conversations with hospital staff. Tommy was too sharp, She had to be careful not to let anything slip. When he asked why she was smiling more than usual, she blamed it on a good tip day at the diner. What Tommy's mom didn't know was that she wasn't the only one working behind the scenes. The nurses had been making calls too. They told the Make-A-Wish people about how Tommy had transformed the pediatric ward into a mini wrestling arena, about how he'd teach other kids his signature moves, modified for hospital safety, of course, about how his "you can't see me" chants echoing down the halls had become a symbol of hope for everyone there. The foundation representatives were touched by Tommy's story, but what really caught their attention was learning about John Cena's impact on Make-A-Wish. He hadn't just granted a few wishes, he'd granted hundreds. In fact, he held the record for the most wishes granted by any celebrity in the foundation's history. This wasn't just publicity for him. It was a genuine commitment to helping kids like Tommy. One day, while Tommy was having his weekly checkup, his favorite nurse slipped his mom a note. It simply said, "It's happening." Tommy noticed his mom's hands shaking as she read it, but she quickly stuffed it in her pocket and blamed it on too much coffee. The hospital staff could barely contain their excitement. They had to bite their tongues every time Tommy talked about John Cena, knowing what was coming. Even grumpy old Mr. Wilson from the cleaning staff was in on the secret, practicing his "you can't see me" wave when nobody was watching. Tommy kept his daily routine, unaware of all the planning happening around him. He still did his exercises, took his medicine, and watched SmackDown religiously every week. His room was still covered in Cena posters, action figures stood guard on his bedside table, and his championship belt hung proudly on the wall. The Make-A-Wish team worked tirelessly behind the scenes. They coordinated with WWE's busy schedule, arranged for special security, and made sure everything would be perfect. They learned about Tommy's favorite Cena matches, his most quoted catchphrases, and even which championship belt he liked best. One evening, Tommy was having a tough time with his treatment. The medicine was making him feel awful, but he still managed to smile when talking about his hero. "Mom," he said, his voice tired but hopeful, "do you think John Cena ever has bad days?" His mom squeezed his hand, fighting back tears as she thought about the surprise to come. "I'm sure he does, honey, but you know what he says about never giving up." The hospital staff started making subtle preparations. They made sure Tommy's room was extra clean, rearranged some equipment to make more space, and even put fresh batteries in all the cameras they had hidden away. Dr. Roberts practiced his poker face, determined not to give away the secret during Tommy's checkups. As the big day got closer, Tommy's mom found it harder to keep the secret. Every time he talked about John Cena, every time he practiced his wrestling moves, every time he showed her his "never give up" wristband, she wanted to burst with the news. But she held strong, knowing the surprise would be worth it. The other kids in the hospital ward were in on it too. They helped create distractions when secret meetings were happening, and some even practiced their own Cena impressions to keep Tommy entertained. The whole floor had become part of this beautiful conspiracy of hope. That morning started like any other day at Boston Children's Hospital. Tommy dragged himself out of bed, still tired from yesterday's treatment. His mom helped him put on his favorite Cena shirt, the one that was getting a bit too big now because of all the weight he'd lost. But he insisted on wearing it anyway, saying it made him feel stronger. Dr. Roberts had scheduled what they called a progress checkup. Tommy wasn't too excited about it. These checkups usually meant more needles and tests. As they walked through the familiar hospital corridors, he touched his John Cena wristband for luck, just like he always did. The examination room felt different that day, though Tommy couldn't figure out why. Maybe it was because Nurse Jenny kept grinning at him for no reason, or because Dr. Roberts seemed to be checking his watch every few minutes. Even his mom was acting weird, constantly fixing her hair and straightening her clothes. "So, Tommy," Dr. Roberts said, flipping through his charts, "tell me how you've been feeling this week." Tommy launched into his usual detailed report, complete with wrestling metaphors. "Well, Doc, the Nos had tried to hit me with a sneak attack, but I reversed it with those pills you gave me, just like when Cena counters an RKO." Just then, they heard commotion in the hallway. Tommy figured it was probably another patient being wheeled past. But then, a voice boomed through the door. A voice he'd heard thousands of times on TV, but never in real life. "Hustle, loyalty, respect." Tommy froze. His heart started racing. "Mom," he whispered, "I think I'm hearing things again. Like that time when the medicine made me dizzy." His mom squeezed his hand, tears already forming in her eyes. "No, Mio, not this time." The door burst open, and there he stood, all 6 feet 1 inch of him, in his neon green, never give up shirt and baseball cap, championship belt gleaming on his shoulder. John Cena, the real John Cena, in the flesh. Tommy's jaw dropped. He blinked hard, convinced he was dreaming. He even pinched himself, something that made Cena laugh. A warm, genuine laugh that sounded nothing like his TV laugh. "I heard there's a champion in this room," Cena said, his voice filling the small space, "and I had to come meet him myself." For the first time in his life, Tommy was speechless. This was the moment he'd dreamed about for years, played out in his head 1,000 times, and now his brain couldn't form a single word. Happy tears rolled down his cheeks as Cena walked over and knelt down to his level. "That's a pretty cool wristband you've got there," Cena said, pointing to Tommy's prized possession. Tommy looked down at his worn-out wristband, suddenly feeling a bit embarrassed about how faded it was. But Cena wasn't done. "You know what? I think it looks even better than mine." Finally finding his voice, Tommy blurted out, "You're really here. You're really real." The whole room burst out laughing, and Tommy felt his face turn red. But Cena just smiled and said, "I'm real, and I hear you've been fighting like a true champion." Dr. Roberts tried to maintain some professional composure, but even he was grinning from ear to ear. He started explaining Tommy's progress to Cena, using medical terms, but Tommy interrupted. "I've been hitting the cancer with the 5 moves of doom." Cena's face lit up, and he asked, "All 5? Even the attitude adjustment?" For the next few minutes, Tommy demonstrated each move, using careful, gentle motions just like he promised his mom. Cena watched intently, offering tips and even demonstrating a few modified versions that Tommy could do safely in his condition. The hospital staff peeked in through the door, trying to be discreet but failing miserably. Everyone wanted to witness this moment. Nurse Jenny was recording everything on her phone, tears streaming down her face. Even grumpy old Dr. Peterson from the next ward stopped by, pretending he needed to borrow some charts. When Tommy showed Cena his collection of WWE drawings, including one of himself winning the championship belt, Cena studied each one carefully. "You've got talent, champ," he said, and Tommy beamed with pride. Then Cena did something unexpected. He asked Tommy to sign one of the drawings for him. But you're supposed to give me your autograph, not the other way around," Tommy protested. Cena shook his head and said, "Champions sign autographs for other champions. That's just how it works." With shaking hands, Tommy signed his name on his best drawing, adding a little "you can't see me" stick figure next to it. The whole scene felt surreal. John Cena sitting cross-legged on the hospital floor with Tommy, looking through his artwork, sharing stories, and just being normal. Not the larger-than-life superstar from TV, but a genuine, caring person who made Tommy feel like the most important kid in the world. What was supposed to be a quick meet and greet turned into something nobody at Boston Children's Hospital would ever forget. After the initial shock wore off, Tommy found his confidence and couldn't stop talking. It was like catching up with an old friend he'd known his whole life, except this friend happened to be his biggest hero. Cena noticed Tommy's WWE Championship belt hanging by the hospital bed and asked if he could take a closer look. "This belt's been through some battle, he said, running his fingers over the worn metal plates. Tommy nodded proudly and explained how his mom had saved up for months to buy it for him. Without missing a beat, Cena reached for his own championship belt and said, "Want to trade for a while?" Tommy's eyes went wide as Cena carefully placed the heavy championship belt in his lap. The real WWE Championship belt. It was heavier than Tommy expected, and much shinier than his replica. "It's got some battle scars too," Cena explained, pointing out tiny scratches and dents from actual matches. "Each one tells a story, just like yours." When lunchtime came around, nobody expected Cena to stay. But he looked at his watch and asked, "What's on the menu today, champ?" Tommy made a face and showed him the hospital lunch. Plain chicken and steamed vegetables. Cena laughed and shared a story about the strict diet he had to follow for wrestling, making Tommy feel better about his own meal restrictions. They ate lunch together in Tommy's room, swapping stories between bites. Tommy told Cena about his playground wrestling club at school, and Cena shared funny stories about his early days training to become a wrestler. He even admitted to messing up his moves sometimes when he first started, which made Tommy feel better about the times he tripped trying to do the 5 moves of doom. After lunch, something amazing happened. The hospital's physical therapy room was empty, and Dr. Roberts gave special permission for Tommy to show Cena his wrestling moves, with very careful supervision, of course. They laid out soft mats, and Tommy's mom watched nervously as Cena taught him some super safe, modified versions of basic wrestling stances. Remember, Cena said seriously, these moves are like your medicine. They only work if you follow the doctor's rules exactly. Tommy nodded solemnly, understanding that this was Cena's way of making sure he wouldn't try anything dangerous. They'd practiced simple poses and safe moves that Tommy could do even with his IV line, making sure not to overexert him. Word had spread throughout the hospital, and other kids started peeking through the physical therapy room windows. Cena noticed and asked Tommy if it was okay to invite some of his friends to join them. Soon, the room was filled with young patients, all wearing different types of medical equipment, learning to strike Cena's famous "you can't see me" pose. Tommy felt like a celebrity himself, helping Cena teach the other kids. For a few magical hours, the physical therapy room wasn't a hospital space anymore. It was transformed into a special kind of wrestling ring where kids could forget about their illnesses and just be kids. One little girl was too shy to join in, watching from her wheelchair by the door. Cena noticed and whispered something to Tommy. Together, they went over and asked her to be their special referee. Her face lit up as Tommy showed her how to do the counting. 1, 2, 3. Soon she was the most enthusiastic referee the hospital had ever seen. When some of the kids started getting tired, Cena switched gears. He pulled up some wrestling videos on his phone, but these weren't the usual match highlights. They were behind-the-scenes bloopers and funny moments that never made it to TV. The kids howled with laughter watching their heroes mess up their lines or trip over their own feet. Tommy's favorite part was when Cena shared real stories about never giving up. He talked about times when he was injured but kept going, times when people told him he couldn't do something but he proved them wrong. But he also said something that surprised everyone. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is ask for help. As the afternoon went on, Cena noticed Tommy starting to get tired, though the boy was trying hard not to show it. Like a true pro, Cena naturally shifted their activities to less physical ones. They sat together looking through Tommy's medical journal, where he'd been tracking his progress using wrestling terms. Cena was genuinely impressed by how Tommy had turned his treatment journey into a series of wrestling matches. The most special moment came when Tommy shyly showed Cena his bad day notebook, where he wrote down his fears and tough moments. Instead of just giving encouraging words, Cena shared his own struggles with self-doubt and fear. Being brave doesn't mean you're never scared, he explained. It means you keep fighting even when you are scared. The sun was starting to set outside the hospital windows, casting a warm golden glow across Tommy's room. Nobody wanted the magical day to end, but Tommy was getting tired, though he tried his best to hide his yawns behind his hand. His mom noticed and started giving those familiar time to rest looks that all moms seem to master. Cena noticed too. He'd spent enough time visiting kids in hospitals to recognize the signs of fatigue. But before saying goodbye, he had something important to share. "Hey champ," he said, sitting down on the edge of Tommy's bed, "I've got a little secret to tell you." Tommy leaned in close, his eyes wide with curiosity. Cena unstrapped one of his wristbands, not a merchandise one, but the actual wristband he'd worn in his last match. It was slightly frayed at the edges and had tiny scuff marks from hitting the wrestling mat. "This," Cena said, holding it up, "is my lucky wristband." He told Tommy about wearing it during his toughest matches, about how it had been through championship victories and brutal defeats. "It's seen more battles than I can count," Cena explained, turning it over in his hands. "But I think it's ready for an even more important fight now." Tommy watched in amazement as Cena carefully placed the wristband in his small hands. It was still warm, and Tommy could see the sweat stains from Cena's workout earlier that day. Proof that this wasn't just another piece of merchandise, but something real and personal. "But wait," Tommy protested, looking worried. "Don't you need it for your matches?" Cena shook his head and smiled. I think it'll be more useful here. Plus, he added with a wink, I have a feeling it's going to help you win the biggest match of all. That's when Cena made the promise that would change everything. He pulled up a chair and got serious, not TV serious, but real serious. Tommy, he said, I want to make you a deal. The room went quiet. Even the usual hospital beeps seemed to fade away. When you beat this thing, not if, but when, I'm going to personally invite you to WrestleMania. Tommy's jaw dropped. WrestleMania, the biggest wrestling event of the year, but Cena wasn't finished. And I don't mean just watching from the crowd. I mean you'll be my special guest backstage and everything. Tommy's mom started to say something about how they couldn't afford such a trip, but Cena held up his hand. Mrs. Martinez, this isn't about money. This is about celebrating a champion's victory. All you have to focus on, he said, turning back to Tommy, is getting stronger. Then Cena did something that made the nurses watching from the doorway gasp. He took off his championship belt and laid it across Tommy's bed. This belt, he said, tapping the gold medal, has been through every kind of battle you can imagine. But the fight you're fighting? That takes more courage than any wrestling match. He showed Tommy the scratches and dents in the belt, telling the story behind each one. See this mark here? That's from when I thought I couldn't go on, but I did anyway. And this one? That's from a time when everyone counted me out, but I proved them wrong. Tommy ran his fingers over each battle scar as Cena talked, soaking in every word. Then Cena pulled out his phone and asked Tommy's mom to take a picture. But instead of just posing, he helped Tommy sit up and showed him how to hold the championship belt properly. Remember, he said, shoulders back, head high, that's how a champion stands. As they took photos, Cena kept telling Tommy stories about persistence and courage. He wasn't just saying empty words, he shared real moments of doubt and fear from his own career, times when he wanted to give up but pushed through anyway. The trick isn't being fearless, he explained, it's being brave enough to keep going even when you're scared. Before leaving, Cena wrote something special in Tommy's journal. It wasn't just a regular autograph, it was a personal message that took up a whole page. Tommy's mom tried to peek, but Cena playfully covered it with his hand. This is just between us champions, he said with a wink, making Tommy giggle. The last thing Cena did was teach Tommy a special handshake. Not the kind you see on TV, but a simple, secret one just for them. This, he said as they practiced it one last time, is our victory shake. When you beat this thing, and you will beat this thing, we'll do this shake at WrestleMania in front of everybody. The next 12 months tested Tommy in ways he never imagined. There were good days when he felt strong enough to practice his wrestling moves, and tough days when even lifting his head from the pillow seemed impossible. But through it all, he wore Cena's wristband, now faded and soft from constant wear. Every time the doctors had to do another round of tests, Tommy would touch the wristband and whisper, "You can't see me." It became his battle cry, something that made even the scariest procedures a little less frightening. The hospital staff picked up on it too, and soon they'd whisper it back to him before every treatment. Tommy kept his promise to stay strong. He turned his hospital room into a training camp, doing whatever exercises the doctors said were safe. On days when he couldn't get out of bed, he'd work on his promos instead, practicing inspiring speeches just like Cena did. His mom recorded some of them on her phone, and they became hits with the hospital staff. Then came the day that changed everything. Dr. Roberts walked into Tommy's room with a bigger smile than usual. Tommy was sitting up in bed, wearing his favorite Cena shirt and working on a get-well card for another kid in the cancer ward. The doctor held up Tommy's latest test results and said the words they'd been waiting so long to hear. The treatment worked. You're cancer-free. Tommy sat there in shock, his marker dropping onto his blanket. His mom burst into tears, but Tommy just kept touching Cena's wristband, making sure this wasn't a dream. That's when Dr. Roberts pulled out his phone and said, "Someone wants to congratulate you." The video call connected, and there was John Cena, grinning from ear to ear. "I heard someone just won their championship match." He boomed through the phone. Tommy could barely speak, but he managed to hold up his wristband to the camera. "I knew that would help," Cena said with a wink. But Cena wasn't done surprising Tommy. "Remember our deal?" he asked. "Well, WrestleMania is next month, and I've got 2 front-row tickets with your name on them. You and your mom better start packing." Tommy looked at his mom, who was smiling through her tears. She'd known about this surprise all along. The month flew by in a blur of excitement. Tommy got stronger every day, determined to be in top form for WrestleMania. His last day at the hospital turned into a celebration. All the kids from the cancer ward came to wish him well, each one doing their best "you can't see me" wave. When WrestleMania weekend finally arrived, Tommy could hardly believe it. The arena was massive, much bigger than it looked on TV. But the real surprise came before the show, when Cena gave them a personal backstage tour. Tommy met all his favorite wrestlers, each one treating him like a fellow champion when they heard his story. Cena had one more surprise planned. Just before his match, he took Tommy aside and said, "I'm gonna need your help out there tonight, champ." He explained his plan, and Tommy's eyes got bigger and bigger as he listened. His mom looked worried until Cena assured her everything would be completely safe. When Cena's music hit that night, the crowd went wild. But instead of heading straight to the ring, he stopped at Tommy's seat. The spotlight found them as Cena lifted Tommy over the barrier. Tommy's mom watched proudly as her son, now strong enough to walk on his own, did their special handshake in front of thousands of cheering fans. Then came the moment that would go viral on social media. Cena lifted Tommy onto his shoulders and carried him down the entrance ramp. Tommy raised his arms in the "you can't see me" gesture, and the entire arena did it right back. The commentators were going crazy, telling Tommy's story to millions watching at home. That night, Cena won his match. But the real victory celebration happened after the show. In a quiet moment backstage, Tommy gave Cena back his wristband. "Keep it," Cena said, pushing it back into Tommy's hands. "You earned it." Plus, he added with a smile, "You might need it to help other kids who are fighting their own battles." And that's exactly what Tommy did. He went back to visit the hospital regularly, wearing Cena's wristband and sharing his story with kids going through what he'd faced. Sometimes, when a child was having an especially tough day, Tommy would let them wear the wristband for a little while, passing on its special strength. Years later, Tommy started a program at the hospital called Champions Corner, where kids fighting serious illnesses could watch wrestling together and support each other. And every now and then, they'd get a surprise video call from a certain WWE superstar who never forgot about the brave kid who turned his hospital room into a wrestling ring.